Hello, everybody. It's so nice for you to take the time to join us for this little YouTube video that I'm doing with Bain. And we're talking about writing your legacy in any way that shape or form that it might take you. And we're going to explore the various ways that you can get your creative juices flowing and ways that you can move forward in letting people know about who you are and what your life is. So, hello, Millie. It's such a pleasure talking to you right now. We've had several conversations over the last few months, and one of the things that I discovered was that our work really does have a lot of overlap. Can you tell my community a little bit about yourself and your business?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Bain. So glad to be having this conversation with you. My background is as a high school teacher. I've worked in nonprofits, philanthropy, university settings. And in that time, I had a chance, actually, when my grandmother was in her 80s, to work with her and help her publish her memoirs. She was really interested in telling her story and especially telling her husband's story. And so working with her really inspired me. And when a few years ago, did some reflection about what has had the most meaningful impact of all the things I've done in my life. Working on that book, what came to the top of the list, actually, which is what inspired me to start NextGen Story Custom Publishing. So we support people to create life story and family history books and support them through the whole process from I have an idea of a book I might want to make, all the way to here are some copies to share with family and friends.
Wonderful. So when I'm working with people on their advanced care planning and their advanced directive, I'm asking them to get to their values, their beliefs, and their preferences for future healthcare. I also want them to put together short pieces on who they are, how they grew up, and what made them who they are today, so their healthcare team can see them as people and not patients. I see your work as a lot more in depth, but it's very similar and gets people thinking. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation today.
Mhm.
Please tell us a little bit more about how you've worked with people who've received a serious diagnosis and when time is of the essence. And tell us a little bit about those stories.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm really interested in this idea of end of life care and how sharing one's story can be a part of that legacy planning and that sort of looking to what you want to leave. This is an opportunity to share their own life in their own words, right? Is the real message here for me. So that all started for me with my father, actually, in terms of end of life care. When he received a terminal cancer diagnosis, I was doing this work. And so he began to do some writing about his life. I worked alongside him to sort of read what he had written. I did an interview with him to ask him some more questions. Can you tell me more about what you meant when you mentioned a tough relationship with your mother, that kind of thing. So I had this amazing opportunity to ask those questions. And he was very clear with me, actually. He said to me, you know what, I want to do the writing, but I don't want to go through the editing and publishing process while I'm here. I want you to do that when I'm gone, which was actually hard for me to hear, but I also understood. I think it's one of those, he wanted to be able to convey some aspects of his life in his own words. And he wanted us, those who love him, to be able to do the work of packaging that for him. And so we did that, and we were able to share copies of his book actually at his memorial service after he passed. So that was a very meaningful project and one very obviously very close to my heart. Mhm.
What do you do to support people who are maybe frail, maybe not able to talk for long periods of time, um, where time is of the essence? And Um, so do you record them? Do you interview them? What's the kind of process that you go through?
Yeah, I always say to people that your job as the story holder is to get, the story needs to come from your head onto, I say paper, but what I really mean is the computer in some format. And there are a few ways that can happen. People think of writing as a first option. For some folks, writing makes sense. For others, they'll write actually handwrite. It's okay to handwrite. We can have people transcribe and work with that as well. For some, they'll use dictation software. So these days with AI, we can go further that with that. But even just a simple dictation software or simple recording software on your phone is a great way to capture a story. I worked with a family recently who had captured 8 hours of content of their grandfather 15 years ago. They put it
Wow.
aside, and now, in the last couple of years, they've taken those recorded interviews, transcribed them, added photos, added context, and we've made a book out of that. So the idea is it's about, reducing the pressure on needing to get to any kind of final product and just saying, how do I get these stories recorded, captured somehow? Whether that be audio, whether that be writing, whether that be even video, whatever mechanism works best for folks, however, short periods of time, 5, 10 minutes at a time, an hour at a time, whatever people feel comfortable doing. And in some cases, we have ghostwriters too, who can get involved. A ghostwriter meaning someone who can interview a loved one or interview yourself and ask the questions that help bring out the story. So that can be really helpful if you are the kind of person who does better in conversation than with a microphone in front of you. So it always depends on the person. Mhm.
You and I have had conversations, and you're really, really, really good at pulling out stories and little memories that just kind of get the rest of the memories just tumbling out. And the way you just told me to tell me more. Um, and it really got down to my values and beliefs very, very quickly in ways that I hadn't imagined. So I want to give you major kudos in our conversations, how easy that was to have those kinds of conversations. But with that in mind, it must be a lot easier these days because the technology is so easy. You can help somebody set up an app on their recording app on their phone. And so everybody's got the technology right there. But what about those boxes and boxes of photos that people have got that one day I'm going to sort those. How do you manage that?
Oh, that's the big question, Connie. What about those boxes of photos? And I think of a book as being made of two parts. There's text and there's images. Those are the two
Mhm.
pieces. When we look back far enough, we don't have many images. So our problem is maybe not enough images of the early days of our grandparents, that kind of thing. And these days we might have, 5,000 photos for a 2-week holiday. um, so we have a lot to sort through. What I always, you know, we always are really focused on the purpose of capturing a story. And so if we're focused on the purpose, we're saying, why do we want to tell the story and for whom? And when I do that, for example, actually with my father's book, he wanted to focus in on his life atop a bicycle, he called it, riding a bicycle. So then we said, okay, well, let's find some photos that fit with that theme. So rather than starting with the hundreds of thousands, you say, we want a photo that really captures my father as a young person with a bicycle. So you're looking for a certain set of photos and you're looking for a certain number of photos. That's one way we really help families to sort through all of that content. That's for sure. And maybe the other thing that is really motivating about doing this work is this is what led my grandmother to do her book was those boxes of photos are hard for anyone to interpret except the person who owns them. However, if we take them and curate them and choose some photos and put a bit of story around them, they can then be meaningful to our family, our loved ones, our friends, whoever we're sharing the book with. And so that's part of the beauty of capturing these is that then these photos and these stories can live on and can be appreciated in years to come.
Can you show one of your favorite books to show, just hold it up and show people how the text and the photos go together?
Yeah, sure. I can give you a couple of examples. So this one here is an interesting one because it's living in tandem. So this was about memoir of the memoir about being more than an autism mom. And what she did is more of a traditional style. Here's some text. She did short chapters, and then she put her photos in one section. So she had a whole section of photos. This used to be done for printing reasons. It's no longer needed to be done for printing reasons, but people choose to do that sometimes. This is a black and white interior, color front. One of the things that comes up is how accessible making books is these days. There's the big costs now are editing and design. But once you get to printing, a book like this, actually, I don't know the exact cost of that one offhand, but this one here, which is also black and white and similar, it costs about $6 each to print wholesale. If you buy it online, it'll cost about $15 on Amazon. But they're actually quite cheap and quite beautiful to print, these soft cover books. Another example, some books do end up being in color. So here's one that's kind of got more of the color imagery to showcase some of the paintings of the author throughout. So, again, all in one section. We've done quite a few also that are kind of coffee table style books. I'm going to reach behind me for this one. So here's one. Um, so this is a larger book, and much more sort of detailed, but you have these sort of photos along with text, right? These cute, cute old photos from the old days, as well as some context of the different pieces of the story. So you can do anything from this, a fairly elaborate big book to something more simple like that. Yeah.
So that brings up a thought for me. The
Yeah.
picture that's over my shoulder, the very colorful one, is a painting that my mom bought when we moved into our new home in Kelowna a very, very long time ago. And it's sat proudly over top of our living room couch for
Hmm.
more than 40 years. And then I took it. So could you if I take a picture like this, can we turn that into, say, a book cover or a little?
Absolutely. And that's a great way to capture the meaning and the essence of things that are important in your home. So, in my family, my grandmother painted. And so she has some beautiful paintings that are in one copy. So, similarly, you probably have one physical copy of that. But if you put it on a book cover or even on the interior, you can then print 10, 20, however many copies you want of the book. And then everyone gets to have a copy of that image. So, that's no. It's a beautiful way to
Cool.
capture. Another thing people have done is even taking photos of, a vase or a significant plaque that someone had been awarded. My grandma. Anyway, so you can choose photos that are meaningful to each family and include those as part of the book. Photos of objects as well as photos from history.
It makes so much sense. I've got a box full of my dad's war medals and awards that he got through the years for his service, and they all just sit in a box.
Yeah.
And nobody, including me, nobody ever looks at them. So
Yeah.
that would be an incredible way of bringing it to life.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say a box because that was one of my favorite projects actually. A family gave me a box. And so this was our great uncle who passed away. Here's a box. There were some objects in the box. There were some postcards in the box. There were some handwritten letters in the box, and they didn't know a lot about this person. It was a fascinating and a beautiful project to say, we don't want this to be just a storage box in the basement. We want to honor this person. We want to tell their story. So it involved some digging and some research and some compilation, but yeah, such a beautiful way to honor a person is to take those things that we have and put them into an accessible format for family. Hmm.
So what holds people back in telling their stories?
Mm. I think the biggest one I hear is believing that it's a bit egotistical to somehow want to do a book. That maybe they're not worth it, or that there's not interest. There's this piece, and I think one of the biggest learnings and beliefs I have is that creating a book isn't actually a gift. It's an act of service to yourself, because when you do a book, you actually will heal and learn more about yourself. It may be a surprise, but it happens to almost everyone I work with. It's a gift to family because they will have stories and understand their own heritage in ways they never did before. And it's a gift to community if you decide to share more broadly, because there's an understanding of that first person experience. Your father's war experiences are unique to him and are a contribution to the overall memory and understanding of that time. So I see them as an act of service, not as an act of ego. But I think sometimes that does hold people back. The other piece that holds people back sometimes is just not knowing how to get started.
Mhm.
And I think we talked a bit about this back and
Yeah.
forth. thinking it's a big thing. Where do I where do I begin? I don't have a book in me. Maybe a paragraph to put above my bed in the hospital. Maybe a short description, but a whole book feels like too much. Yeah.
One of my dad's words or sayings of wisdom was start at the beginning, go to the end, and stop. But what
Hmm.
I've learned in life, it start in the middle
Yeah.
and then go wherever. And so you have talked to me about that before. People saying, well, I was born in on such and such a date, and they get stuck
Yeah.
with that kind of storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be tricky. And I think I've actually created a journal called My Life, My Words right here with a bunch of questions to help people get thinking about where the stories could go and what kind of stories to tell, stories of your early years, especially education, relationships, children, all sorts of things. And I think you're right. Starting at the middle or starting at the beginning can be really, really challenging. Maybe the other thing to think about is that the stories themselves may be even more meaningful to someone 40 years from now than they are now. So maybe your grandchildren or children who are teenagers now aren't that interested. But when they're in their 50s and 60s, they will wish, they may likely wish that someone had done this for them. So you're giving a gift to the next generation, several generations from now, if you know what I mean.
Is that because, in our 50s and 60s, we're looking at our own mortality and we don't want to disappear? And so we have kind of a thought that, well, then I better not let my ancestors disappear either because I'm the last one to hold those memories.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And I think my theory on this as well is that we start to see some of the connectedness a bit more. So to say, wait a minute, now that I'm getting older, I can see how my parents lived life at this age. I can see the wisdom that they had, and I can see now what I want to offer future generations. So I think there really is a wisdom that comes with age. Margaret Atwood, a very famous Canadian author, always said, I will not write a memoir. And then when she turned 80, she said, I'm writing a memoir. And she did. You know, there's something that happens where you just realize, wait a minute, I have something to give in my own life experiences and perspective. So that point
Can,
comes at a different time for us all.
can you hold up that journal again and tell
Hmm.
our audience how they can get that?
Yeah, sure. You can get a copy at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Indigo, any online bookstore. It's called My Life, My Words, and I have in it sort of some of the tips that I give folks to help get started. So 5 questions to ask as you begin, that kind of thing, and then a whole bunch of questions. It's designed as a journal, so you could actually fill it in the book itself, or you could use it as a prompt and fill it in on the computer as you wish. But yeah, people are very welcome to grab this and enjoy. And I think the other thing that people could join, if I should segue to that, if you're interested in your life story, is we have Connect and Grow groups that gather. So there are small groups of people who are working on life story and family history books. We're often working in isolation on this kind of project. So having others who are also in the same journey, either collecting material, beginning the writing, maybe working on some editing, wherever you are in the process of putting a book together, these groups can be a great place to connect and motivate each other. So that you can find more about those on my website as well.
Tell us your website one more time.
Oh, sure, yeah, it's NextGen Story Custom Publishing. So it's www.nextgenstory.com.
Marvelous. Um, let's see. We went through that question about your book. Um, so one of the things that people talk to me about is that they don't think that their life was interesting.
Mhm.
So how do you show them that their life is interesting? Because it was. I can guarantee that everybody's life is interesting.
Yeah, I have to kindly disagree with them usually when they say that. There's two things I love to do with folks if I have a chance. One is to ask the question that is from a quote is, you know, what advice would you have for your younger self? If you can write the advice you have for your younger self, you might start to get some insights into the kinds of messages you want to send. So that's one question I like to work with. But then the other is a tool from Guided Autobiography. I trained as a guided autobiography instructor, and they have a tool called Turning Points. It's a fascinating conversation to have, as well as a tool you can use to think about where could life have gone a different direction if you had made a different choice, right? Often those choices, the choices that first come to mind are big moves, moving cities or countries, a marriage choice or a divorce choice, big relationship choices, choices to do with children, and also business choices, career choices, So you start to think about where were those turning points? What was happening at each of those turning points, and how can I tell those stories? That often helps us to get into the moments and realize the significant aspects of our life. I often hear the self-deprecation from women, and of a certain generation as well, saying, "I don't think I'm valuable," or "I don't think my stories are meaningful." I'm working with a woman right now who has English as a second language, right? So her English is a challenge. She's not sure. It's like, there's all of these barriers, and yet me as an outsider, when I read what she is sharing, I'm saying this is compelling, this is important. It doesn't matter what the grammar is, doesn't matter how you've written it. The story that's there is really important, and meaningful to other women who have similar life stories. Because believe it or not, no matter what your turning points were, you're going to have someone else who has something in common. You know, there's going to be somebody else who reads that and says, "Oh, I didn't know someone else had the same thing happen to them." It's the nature of humankind.
Mentioned to you that I had looked in an old trunk that hadn't been opened for a very long time, and inside I found little diaries that my grandmother, who was an immigrant from Norway, had written for each of her children. And there were not a lot of pages, but it was really inspiring for me to read this woman who obviously had to labor over those words and have them come out in English and talk about my grandfather or my father when he was a child. Means the absolute world to me. It was just like a gift from the heavens to get something so incredibly precious. So we just don't know what's going to be important to us later. You had
Mhm.
also told me about one of your favorite quotes from Steinbeck. What was that?
hmm Yeah, so he says, just don't think about the 400 pages. He says, lose track of the idea of a book and just do one page per day. And I think that idea, I think we talked earlier about that feeling of it's going to be a lot, right? It's going to be a lot to do this. It's like you just need to do one story at a time. I'll often say to people, if you can just write a little bit every day, whatever that little bit means for you, a couple hundred words, a page or two, you decide. But you just do a bit every day and you commit to doing that every day, you will find yourself with content over weeks and months. And then if, some days you'll have so many ideas. Oh, I could write about this. You have many ideas of what to write. You can put them on a little sticky note. All the 5 ideas for that day. Write one of them. And then a couple days in future, when you sit down at the computer and think, oh, I can't think of what to talk about or write about. You can look back at the sticky note and say, ah, yeah, I want to write this one. So that's a great way to kind of keep the juices flowing and keep the practice happening. But it's in these little bits of writing that you can really start to articulate the stories. The other thing, actually, I'll add is that it often really helps to think of a single person that you're writing for. So
Mhm.
that whether that's a niece or a nephew or a child or a grandchild, but actually a person. And one exercise you can use is even saying, if it was you, Connie, I'd be saying, "Dear Connie," you know, every morning. And then write as if you're telling the story to that person. There's something about writing for a person that will help your voice to come through, your natural writing voice. And it will also give you a sense of which kinds of stories do you really want to convey to this person you're imagining. So.
So, what
Yeah.
do you do with information or stories that are really difficult? You mentioned your father's relationship with his mother was difficult, and sometimes the most healing things are for us to write out, to get it out of here and onto paper. But how do you help people do that sensitively so it won't hurt others along the way?
Yeah, this is a big part of the work we do actually, is supporting people to think through this because in every story there are ups and there are downs, there are challenging parts. The first thing that we say may be a bit surprising, but the first draft is always a rough draft. It's never meant to be printed and shared. It's meant to be there and edited and worked on and refined over time. So I always say for the first draft, write as it comes to you. Write that hard part, write that sensitive part, and don't worry about it yet. You know, so
Put in all
that's
the
the first version.
put all the swears in
Put
if
all the
you.
swears in there. That's fine. You know, it's a first draft, it's a rough draft, it's getting it out there. And then there's a process of sort of reflection on that. I've found, maybe the rest of your writing, you end up reading it over 3, 4, 5 times, but that one section, you'll end up reading it over 15, 20, 30 times. And that's a part of the process, part of reading, saying, okay, how am I gonna adjust this? How am I gonna convey what's here. This is a part of the healing process. We have structural editors who at some point will look through the manuscript and will give an outsider's perspective on that sensitive piece and saying, does that feel like from an outside reader's perspective too much or how can we support you in documenting that piece? But it's in some cases we do things like changing names, changing identifying details. In other cases, that's not as much needed. It really depends on the context and situation. Um, Maybe though, the important thing to realize is that you don't need to begin writing thinking about the hardest part. Sometimes you get fixated on it because you know it's going to be so challenging. You can approach it gently. You can start writing other pieces. You can know in your heart that you will solve that piece. You will write it in a good way. It will take more time, but it will be written in a good way. It needs to be placed in context and articulated well, and that's part of what we're here to support with our editing and coaching and everything else. It's just yeah to tell your story. It's your story in the end, you know. Yeah.
Some of this they people can go online onto Amazon or wherever and find the journal. Um, I will get you to send that to me so I can make sure it's in the notes underneath this video. Um, and as well as the groups that you have, the small groups. A lot of people are probably saying to themselves, yeah, but how much does Mali's services cost?
Mhm.
How much do people usually spend on getting a book to publishing?
Yeah, so I think there's two costs to think about. One is that printing cost, which can actually be quite low these days, and the other is all of the work involved in putting the book together, any coaching, interviewing, editing, and designing. So I usually say to people it's anywhere between $3,000 and $30,000. So that's a huge range, and it all depends on the choices that you make as an author or as a writer. So you're choosing what kinds of editing you want or don't want, what kind of cover design you want, kind of interior design, what kind of choices you make along the way. The more editing you do, the more the cost increases, the less the cost. So I think what we usually do is work with a family and say, what is the budget that you're looking at? What is the product you're trying to get to? And how can we find a way to help you get the book that you would like within the budget that's there for you? We also do provide a free session for anyone. I know that these services are not affordable for everyone, and I'm happy to meet with anyone just to talk about your book and encourage you along your way and help you on the next step. So that's also an option for anybody, whether you're interested in our services or not. So
So that
declare.
little black and white book is going to be a lot less expensive than that big coffee table book.
Yeah, both in terms of printing and also in terms of design and work in advance, for sure. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times when we think about it, we think of it as being part of again a gift to future generations or a gift to to others is that investment in creating a a beautiful book that will last for 100 years to come.
So one of the things as we start to close out is that there's a lot of the healing power of writing is huge.
Mhm.
I would imagine that the healing comes from other people who are reading the book as well.
Yeah.
I can only imagine that there are things that I've said and done over my lifetime as a mother that my kids probably didn't understand, and seeing it in written form would certainly help. So I'm a writer, and so this would not be a daunting task for me, but I can see that it would be for others and could almost bring out some, be triggering PTSD. And so your you and your team are probably um, very sensitive to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, everyone's story is a bit is different and has different aspects. I'll give you one example of a book we worked on last year where the at first the author said, "I'm not even sure if I want to write this book. I'm not sure if I'm ready for it." So we did one interview to say, "Well, let's just try an interview and see if that helps. We can do the interview with you. We'll write it up for you." He sent it back. In the end, he ended up writing a ton. So he got to writing. However, he couldn't write one very, very sensitive part of his life, right? It was a traumatic bankruptcy that he just couldn't even articulate. It was too emotional. It was too hard for him to speak of. The other thing he had a really hard time writing about was his love for his wife. He knew it was there, but he wasn't the type of person to have the words to say anything beyond "I love my wife." And so we had an interviewer work with him again for that piece. So that's one way we've really worked alongside folks um, in helping articulate some of these messages, some of these harder parts of life. I also really encourage people to find writing groups. We have our Connect and Grow groups, absolutely. And also in the writing process, as I mentioned, I'm a guided autobiography instructor, and people can go online and find guided autobiography classes, either in person or online, at local colleges and things. And those are a great way to have a writing community alongside you. So finding those supports, those small group supports are really important for folks. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
So I want to just close with a couple of the books that have been really meaningful that you've told me about. One was a woman who had an autistic son.
Yeah. This one is called, I showed it a minute ago, is called Living in Tandem, memoir about being more than an autism mom. So this one came out a few years ago, and really tells the story of her and her son and the ways that they've found to sort of be in tandem. It's a journey of healing in so many ways. So.
And there was another one that involved healing. I can't
Yeah,
remember
so
which
I'll
one.
just point out here, it's Lost Within Waves. And so this
Mm.
one is a really hard context. A woman who had a child pass away in utero at 9 months, an experience that other women in Canada and across the world share. And she's written about it as a counselor, written about her grief process and the way that she has engaged with mindfulness, art, and other forms of healing to help her move through that journey. So those were two that really engaged with the healing journey. I think actually the one right beside it over here called Puritans, Quakers, and Witches is that on a different track. It's more looking back through family history. So this one's over 500 years of family history going way back in North America with a rather colorful cast of characters, as the title indicates. So a whole
People
range of
really done
stories.
journey at journals along the way that you could take from. How did that work?
For this one, yeah, a lot of family history research. So similar to the book I worked on, there's a lot you can find these days. You can find photographs, you can find ship's records, you can find all sorts of fascinating content from the early days that help piece together the story of a family. And that start to give that sense of, they call it continuous identity, which is so valuable for younger folks. The sort of evidence on reduced anxiety, increased resilience, and a stronger sense of identity as a result of having an awareness of your own family's stories. So I think any of these books would support that for the families that are lucky enough to have them in their lives.
Are all of those titles on your website in case somebody wants to read anything that you brought up today?
Absolutely. Yeah. All of the titles are on the on my website at nextgenstory.com. You can find links to them or you can find them at your favorite online retailer, whatever that may be.
Fabulous. Well, As usual, I could talk to you forever. That we just have so much in common in just dealing with people who are humans and
Mhm.
and bringing their stories to light and seeing, making sure that they don't disappear at the end of their lives, because I think that that is it's a really big reason why people are afraid of death, is that
Yeah.
they'll disappear. And this is a really important way to show the world that they were here and they were important
Yeah.
in big and small ways. So I thank you so much for this time with you today, and make sure this gets out to the world. And
Hmm.
and I hope that you people reach out to you in one way or another, in the ways that are inexpensive, the ways that, if they're willing to put some of their hard-earned savings towards a legacy, then that's an option as well. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me on today, Connie. I hope these books will last 100 years, and I don't know what else will. So I hope
That
folks take it upon their heart to consider creating something. And it's always a joy to talk to you. I learn and see new things about this work and about our work every time we connect. So thank you.
marvelous. Thank you so much.